Two figures in recent news have a profound effect on the entire news industry and on the journalism that you see, hear, and read. Here they are, $15 million and $30 million. I've been wondering when I'd get to this crucial point about how the media works, and today is the time for it. As we head into a new year, I'm going to break these down for you so you can understand why so many of the problems in the news industry continue, what's driving it, what makes people inside these industries so afraid to stand for change. You'll also see why it can be empowering for you to understand these two figures, because they show all of us how we can get the news industry to do a better job. Also today, two deadly attacks, one in Germany at a Christmas market, the other in New Orleans on New Year's Eve, have triggered a new battle over what is and is not terrorism. And while the media has been pointing fingers at the government about this, the media has not been acknowledging its own role in creating this confusion. I'll show you how the news has been ignoring very basic data that would put this in context and help you understand this huge phenomenon that's going on in the world. Also today, I'll announce the winners or losers of the Media Fail Awards. Your vote decided who was the worst of 2024. All that and more coming up on this first 2025 episode of They Stand Corrected. Hello and welcome. And since this is the first episode of 2025, Happy New Year. I hope you all had terrific holidays. It is so good to have you. For those of you who don't know, my name is Josh Lebs, and this is my podcast, They Stand Corrected, which fact checks the news. I spent 20 years inside mainstream media, 10 on NPR, 10 on CNN. I became lead on-air fact checker. During all that time, I saw so many problems inside the news ecosystem, and I saw how incredible numbers of falsehoods get reported as though they're true. They're massive fact-checking failures, and we are all hurt by that. This show looks at these problems and how we can help fix them together. With each episode, I send out a newsletter, which is free. I encourage you to sign up for it. You can find it at my website, joshlebs.com, JOSHLEVS.com. Just click newsletter. It is sent out through this cool thing called Substack, and if you are a Substack person, you can find it there. It's called They Stand Corrected. One great way to support this show is to become a paid subscriber to the newsletter. And if you do, you get direct access to me. You submit things that you want me to fact check. And for those who are not paid subscribers, there is a form that you can fill out. Let's dig in. Ever since I started this show, I've known that I need to get to this topic, and it just hasn't been the right time until now. Now it is. And the topic is money. We need to dig into this because the problems that I talk about on this show, the fact-checking failures, the things that the news keeps getting wrong, they're all fueled by money. And two figures in the news lately are serving as a powerful reminder. Let's start with this.
A settlement today in a case between ABC News and Donald Trump.
This is from KGO, a station owned by ABC.
ABC agreed to pay $15 million to Trump's presidential library to settle a defamation lawsuit. Trump sued the network and anchor George Stephanopoulos after a This Week interview in which Stephanopoulos said a jury found Trump liable for rape when he was really found liable for sexual abuse.
Now, that payment did make big news. Some people call it a vindication against anti-Trump left-wing media. Others say it's caving into Trump's power. This part of the story is what the media did cover. So I'm going to give you a quick summary on this and then get into the whole story that no one's telling you. Last year, George Stephanopoulos did an interview with a representative, Nancy Mace, a Republican who was supporting Trump. She has also spoken out about being a rape survivor. So he pressed her on why she was supporting him, and George Stephanopoulos made remarks like this.
You've endorsed Donald Trump for president.
Right.
Donald Trump has been found liable for rape by a jury. Donald Trump has been found liable for defaming the victim of that rape by a jury. It's been affirmed by a judge.
She kept trying to deflect those questions by saying that he was shaming her as a rape victim, which, no, he wasn't. Asking her how she squares those two things is perfectly legitimate. But Trump's team came after him for saying that he was found liable for rape. As you heard in that update, ABC ended up paying out $15 million, saying he was actually found liable for sexual abuse. But not so fast. I've talked about this on the show before. The judge in that case has written that the jury found Trump liable for rape. I read what the judge wrote, so I know this is what he said. And I'm going to play you a couple clips here about that from a Washington Post piece.
He says that what the jury found Trump did was in fact rape, as commonly understood. He said that the conduct the jury effectively found Trump liable for, forced digital penetration, meets a more common definition of rape. He cited definitions offered by the American Psychological Association and the Justice Department, which in 2012 expanded its definition of rape to include penetration with any body part or object.
So, why did ABC make this payout instead of going ahead and arguing, hey, it was legitimate based on what the judge said? Well, this case was advancing. The Trump team was most likely about to get discovery, which means access to ABC internal communications, emails, all that. No company wants that stuff out there. And given the way that Trump goes after the media in general, they could have a field day with whatever messages they got a hold of. Plus, it could have been protracted litigation and against a sitting president, and who knows what a court may have decided. It seems very unlikely that ABC would have done this kind of a settlement with anyone else, given what the judge said. But they did decide to do so here, and they've not given their reasons. There are important concerns that this can have a chilling effect, showing that corporate bosses won't back up news divisions, even if those news divisions have a strong legal argument. That part is getting attention. You know what's not getting attention? ABC News laid off dozens of people last year. I've heard from people inside ABC after this who are saying, oh, okay, so we have $15 million to settle this, but we had to lay people off, and we're being told more layoffs are probably coming. This kind of thing happens all the time. Corporations demonstrate to their news teams that there is all this money, but that they consider journalists expendable. Now, in reality, this money often does come from different buckets. Like in some cases, legal fees and settlements can be paid from certain insurance funds and other things. But this is not the first time this happened. Here's another example with ABC. Disney owns ABC. A year ago, news broke about Disney CEO Bob Iger that his compensation more than doubled after a year in which the company laid off thousands of people. Charles Gasparino, a correspondent on Fox Business, discussed this at the time.
I've been getting calls from people who work at ABC. Okay, these are people who work in the news division who claim the following: while he's getting paid extra money, they've frozen salaries. There are no bonuses, and they're bracing for another round of layoffs. They apparently had two; they're going to get one more. They're saying, like, where's the fairness?
He did point out that Disney offers up justifications for this stuff about how CEOs are compensated and stocks and all that. But think about what this says to journalists inside news organizations. They are constantly reminded that they are expendable, that there's all this money available, but not to keep them. And when they hear about these big payouts, that is a reminder to them that there are probably going to be more layoffs in order to cost cut to make up for where they are spending millions of dollars. Journalists and news organizations live in fear. When I was at CNN, fear was basically the fuel. People were always convinced that they were going to be next on the chopping block. Speaking of CNN, recently David Zaslav, CEO of Warner Brothers Discovery, sold a bunch of his own stock in a company, netting him $30 million instantly. That's aside from his massive payouts. That company owns CNN, which has had layoffs. At one point during last year, it announced that it was letting about 100 people go. You should also know that when you hear about headcount reduction, it's even worse than it sounds, because these companies also find ways to let go of people who have been there for a long time, for decades even, who generally have higher salaries. They've gotten cost of living increases. A lot of them have worked their way up the ranks. These news agencies drop them and hire people in their early 20s who work for very little money. But then they say the entire headcount isn't that much lower, which, by the way, is how a lot of these radicalized kids right out of college get jobs inside news agencies, because progressive groups and these radical professors encourage them to go into media. And they get the chance to have these jobs because people with experience are being let go. So every time you hear announcements about big money in these companies that own news organizations, That is a sign to journalists that there's probably going to be further cuts ahead. And that is why so many of them are afraid to rock the boat, afraid to say anything. Even when they know there are problems, they're afraid. This is something I saw firsthand. When I was at CNN, I took legal action against what was then Time Warner for fair parental leave. And that created all this news. I was on the front page of the New York Times. They were talking about me on the Today Show, all this stuff. So many people inside CNN were shocked that A, we even have the right to take action against a company, but B, shocked that I would do so. They were saying, "But you're biting the hand that feeds you. What if they fire you?" And I said, yeah, for the type of legal action I took, it would be illegal for them to fire me for it, but it could happen anyway. But you have to do what's right and stand for what's right. I understand that most people are afraid. And that is why so much of what I bring you on this show is brought to me by journalists inside news agencies who want me to expose what their news agencies are doing because they're afraid to say anything. Now, coming up, I'm going to tell you how we can use this to our advantage in getting the news media to do a better job. But first, another failure that we've seen in recent days. This one involves terrorism.
Money is my drug of choice. Injects better than my Rolls Royce. Money is my drug of choice. Injects better than my Rolls Royce.
Let's meet up in person. I have some events coming up. I have been so fortunate to speak at places all over the country and around the world, at the United Nations, Congress, Oxford, lots of universities, tons of businesses and conferences. Ironically, I think this counts as irony. Yeah, I had done relatively few in the city where I happen to live, Atlanta. That is changing. I have a couple events coming up in Atlanta. On February 6th, I'll be speaking at an event about fighting anti-Semitism. And this event is especially designed for non-Jewish people who want to help in that fight, plus people who do happen to be Jewish, who want to know the tools that work. I'll be speaking along with a couple of really fantastic people and answering your questions. You can find a link to that in my newsletter and in the show notes. That's February 6th. Actually, the next evening, I'll be speaking in a historic synagogue in Atlanta, the Temple, to the Friday evening service there. On February 23rd, I'll be up in Albany, New York, my hometown, speaking there. And you will also find that link in the show notes and the newsletter. If you're in that area, I'd love to have you come. Be sure to register for either of these events. And if you are somewhere in the Northeast, you might want to piggyback on that event in Albany. If there's somewhere else not too far away in driving distance, maybe that's the time to book me for the days afterward. I love traveling and doing events. You can get all the information you need about that and sign up to book me. There's a form at my website for that, joshlebs.com. Just click on bookings. Just before Christmas, I released an episode about attacks on Christians around the world, including what I mentioned was an attempted attack in Germany. Well, right as that episode came out, there was a new attack at a Christmas market in Germany. Here's CBS News.
Investigators are looking into the past of a Saudi Arabian doctor who they say drove the car at speed into the crowd.
News came out that this attacker had moved to Germany years ago. He apparently preached anti-Islam stuff and posted rants and became increasingly erratic and dangerous. So what led him to attack this Christmas market? As I record this, it's still unclear. There were reports, though, that the Saudi government had warned Germany about this guy and wanted him sent back. Now, that sounds like a major red flag, right? The problem here is that the media left out context, so we really don't know the value of that warning. See, this guy had apparently been helping women who wanted to escape Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia does have its own reasons for wanting someone like him back. When I looked at reports about the Saudi government having warned Germany about this guy, saying send him back, what I did not see was how often the Saudi government says that about people who criticize the Saudi government. Because if they do that all the time, then that warning would not be any more relevant here unless they had some specific reason to say this guy's going to carry out an act of violence. Then came a deadly attack in New Orleans on New Year's Eve when a guy drove a truck into people celebrating on Bourbon Street. New Orleans Mayor LaToya Cantrell said this at a news conference.
First of all, we do know that the city of New Orleans was impacted by a terrorist attack. It's all still under investigation.
After that, in that same news conference, FBI Assistant Special Agent Alethea Duncan said this.
This is not a terrorist event. What it is right now is their improvised explosive devices that was found.
That, of course, created confusion. With the government, part of what often goes wrong here is shorthand. Sometimes what they really mean is that they have not yet determined whether an attack was part of an organized terrorist network, or whether it was inspired by a global movement for terrorism, or if it was just a lone crazy person who had this other reason for doing what they were doing. Eventually, it came out that this attacker in New Orleans was Muslim and pledged his allegiance to ISIS. And the FBI said the case is being investigated as an act of terrorism. In the media sense, it's understandable that the media got confused about this. Here's a clip from Sky News UK.
There was a contradiction. The mayor calling it terrorism, the FBI saying it was not terrorist related. I wonder, the FBI have since cleared that up, officials saying they are looking into this as an act of suspected terror. I wonder if the confusion stems from the FBI's definition of terror or terrorism being more tightly defined.
The definitions are confusing and long, and hearing them does not help you or anyone. But the real problem here is that the media ignores its own role in creating a mess around the word terrorism. I did an episode about the word terrorism early on in this show. Here's a section from that. This was episode 2. You hear about the fight against terrorism elsewhere.
Gunfire and explosions rock a Paris neighborhood. Police target the mastermind of the terror attacks. A female suicide bomber blows herself up. Another terrorist killed by police.
One of the world's most infamous terrorists, Anwar al-Awlaki, killed by an airstrike in Yemen.
More than 20 suspected Islamic terrorists killed by Egyptian airstrikes in Sinai.
And here's the kind of thing you hear about Israel.
Israeli soldiers killed at least 6 armed Palestinians.
See, in this case, they're armed Palestinians, not terrorists. Or how about this?
An Israeli soldier was freed this morning after 5 years as a prisoner of the Palestinian militant group Hamas. Gilad Shalit was exchanged for hundreds of jailed Palestinians.
Now it's a militant group, not terrorists. And there's a big difference because terrorists target civilians. And these people are jailed Palestinians, even though people released perpetrated terrorist attacks. Listen to this from NPR.
In Germany, police have made arrests in connection with Anis Amri, the Tunisian Islamist terrorist who drove a truck into a Christmas market.
Now listen to this from the West Bank.
And Israel has arrested 2 Palestinian suspects after the fatal shooting of an American Israeli.
Israel said it was going after terrorists, just as Germany said that. These were terrorists who had killed this American who was visiting for a wedding. They wanted to kill a civilian as part of an effort to terrorize a population. So, the media itself is not consistent or clear. In general, if an attack is aimed at civilians to terrorize a population, by many definitions, that is enough to make it terrorism. The media can be absolutely clear about that, but it isn't. And this inconsistency leads some people to try to make other arguments. Like, you often hear that the use of this term is unfair to Muslim people. There are these complaints that have been frequent since the days of 9/11. Here's just one example that I pulled up for you. This is from NBC News in 2015. The 2 speakers here are Arsalan Iftikhar and Reza Aslan.
I think terrorism today has been co-opted to only apply when brown Muslim men commit acts of mass murder, and when white Christian people like Anders Breivik in Norway kill 77 teenagers and try to bomb the Prime Minister of Norway's office. We didn't ask Norway's Christian leaders to come out on national television and condemn this.
Every single organization, major organization, Muslim organization throughout the world and in the United States, every prominent individual, be it political or religious leaders, everyone has condemned not just this attack, but every attack that occurs in the name of Islam.
That has never been true. Obviously, tons of Muslim leaders and groups justify and praise terrorists. We've seen that especially over the past year and a few months since October 7th of 2023. Lots of people proudly support the most horrific Islamist terrorist attack of modern times. And the comparison in there to Christians holds no water because there isn't a widespread global phenomenon of Christian terrorists going around trying to slaughter people. But this argument that terrorist attacks are not representative of a broad swath of Islam, a lot of people in the media are so afraid of being called Islamophobic that they refuse to state certain facts about just how popular terrorism is among huge numbers of Muslim people in the world. Like after the New Orleans attacks, the terrorist's brother explained that they grew up Christian, that his brother had converted to Islam, and the brother told the New York Times this, quote, "What he did does not represent Islam. This is more some type of radicalization, not religion." And the Times reported that and then just moved right on. Well, what does or does not represent any religion can be a matter of belief. This is a case in which the news media could stop and tell you hard, concrete facts, but they don't. By the way, The Independent took that line from the New York Times story and made it the lead of their story, that the brother says this does not represent Islam. But support for terrorism is factually a part of what huge numbers of Muslim people are being taught in the ways that they are learning about Islam. The media ignores these figures, but here's what we know. Back in 2017, Pew Research reported that Muslims mostly say suicide bombs and other forms of violence against civilians in the name of Islam are rarely or never justified. In a few countries, a quarter or more of Muslims say these attacks of violence are at least sometimes justified, including 40% in the Palestinian territories, 39% in Afghanistan, 29% in Egypt, 26% in Bangladesh. Those are big numbers. We're talking millions and millions of people. Actually, in Bangladesh, 62% had a favorable view of ISIS. But even those don't tell the whole story, because most terrorist attacks take place in Muslim countries across the Middle East and North Africa, and most of those attacks kill Muslim people. Those terrorist groups get power by terrorizing people who otherwise might not want to live under their extremist rule. So what about when you ask a different question? What about when you take out the attacks that they face? There's a survey that looked at support for anti-American terrorism. It found that across 12 Muslim nations, the majority supported attacks against the United States everywhere, 52%. Those figures are from back in 2017. Recently, we've seen massive global support for terrorism. In the United States, 21% of Muslims said last year that Hamas's October 7th massacres were acceptable. In the UK, nearly half of Muslims said they support Hamas after what it did. Don't worry about all these specific numbers, by the way. If you're new to this show, you should know I always tell people I'll make the numbers available in the newsletter if you want them. The idea here is that it is a very large number, and the media doesn't stop to tell you that. And of course, this does not mean that all Muslim people support these attacks, but the reality is that it is representative of the Islam that many people are learning. Here's a figure that you've probably never read or heard or seen in mainstream media. It's from a group called Fondapol, the Foundation for Political Innovation. It's a French group which identifies as center-right. News media have cited this group on other things. The New York Times itself has cited them, but not on this. They just ignore this finding. The group tracks and calculates terrorist attacks. It says that between 2013 and 2024, more than 56,000 Islamist attacks took place worldwide, and it says Islamist attacks represent more than 84% of terrorist attacks since 1979. Okay, so what does all this tell us? Here's the deal. The news media should be making this super clear. First, terrorism is terrorism no matter what ideology the person has. When a person is going after civilians to terrorize a population, it's terrorism. Just say that. The New Orleans attack does seem to be representative of the vast majority of terrorist attacks worldwide, which are carried out by Islamists. The terrorist attack in Germany does not seem to be typical for these kinds of attacks, given what that attacker has said. See what you can tell people if you just look at the facts and you set aside your own fears? Journalists, do better. Help people understand the context of how an attack fits into what's going on in the world. Why are they failing? That's coming up. When I created this show, I knew that I wanted to make it possible for you all to get in touch with ideas, with feedback, with requests for me to fact check things. But I also knew that there are lots of haters out there and spammers, plus these bots. So I found a way around them. There is this cool form that you can find. It's linked in the show notes and at my website. It instantly sends your email a code that you then input. The form then gets to me. It's working really well. If you are a listener who has not yet reached out to the show in any way, I would love for you to take, just 1 minute maybe to click on that form, fill it out, let me know what you think. And you might decide you want to submit an audio testimonial as well. You've probably heard some of those on the show. I'd love to hear from you that way. Here's what you've been waiting for. The winners or losers of the Media Fail Awards. First, the biggest single fail of 2024 for a broadcast news agency, CBS, for its disastrous handling of an interview with a biased author named Ta-Nehisi Coates. Across the mainstream media, so-called journalists laid out a red carpet for him and just let him lie all he wants. But when a CBS anchor actually challenged him, the network freaked out and punished its own anchor. At CBS, punishing journalism gets the first ever Media Fail Award. All right, in the text category, the biggest single fail goes to the New York Times, refusing to correct things it knows are wrong. I explained that the Times told me in writing that they don't correct some things. It's all bonkers. You can hear why in the episode. All this is at the website, MediaFailAwards.com, and that has lots of episodes embedded so you can hear details. And now, our two worst overall awards. The worst broadcast news agency of the year, the BBC. The BBC actually got more than a third of votes for this. Second place was CNN at just under a quarter. The BBC's bias has been quantified by a study, and it gets tons of taxpayer dollars in the UK, but it also broadcasts right here in the United States. And finally, the worst overall in the text category, back to the New York Times. It just barely beat out the Washington Post for this distinction from hell. All of these news agencies will be informed of their sardonic win here and will receive a certificate of failure. Will it make a difference? Well, that brings me back to the topic of money. Money talks. The executives who own these sites are obsessed with coming out ahead financially because the days of other divisions subsidizing news divisions are long past. I created this show to change the paradigm, to get so many people focused on things that are not matters of opinion, but just straight up lies, failures to follow rules, failures to set consistent rules, concrete things. The key is for corporate owners to feel pressure to get news agencies to fix these things. My hope for 2025 is to help this show skyrocket so it can make a big difference in the news ecosystem. So here is my request to you. Take about a minute and think about where you currently pay for content. Do you give money to these outlets that are failing you? If so, stop. Do you watch or listen to them, giving them the advertiser traffic they seek? If so, it's best to cut back. And that doesn't mean ignoring all news. At my newsletter, I show my paid subscribers how to access news from anywhere without paying anything, and generally without having to see ads either. Totally free and legal way to do it. With your help, we can turn this show into something much bigger, something that reaches so many people that the bigwigs will have to respond. The more people hear this show, the more people become a part of this community, the bigger difference we'll make. Anything you can do to help this show grow, I very much appreciate. That means telling people you know about it, helping get more listenership. It means taking a minute to rate and review it on the podcast platforms. And each person who chooses to support this show by becoming a paid subscriber or making a contribution or getting merch, each of you doing that is going a long way toward making this battle succeed. So if you are giving your hard-earned money each month to some places that are failing you journalistically, maybe cancel all those and give a little portion of it here. If we grow this show into the force it can be, then the people overseeing these news agencies will realize that they have to fix this. As always, thank you so much for listening. And hey, I know a lot of people are starting to feel maybe trepidatious, maybe some dread about certain changes ahead. Well, know this. All times of change bring opportunities. We can seize those opportunities together. Let's do that in 2025. More about that next week. I'll see you then.